Stand, Kneel, Now What? Season 2, Episode 15, Mass Mistakes. Hi, my name is Karen. I like to say that I'm the good kind of Karen. I am first and foremost a daughter of God, a wife, mom of two, and I recently came home to the Catholic Church. I love my faith so deeply that I want others to love it too. Whether you are a cradle Catholic, Catholic curious, or you have come home to the Catholic Church as an adult like I have, Stand, Kneel, Now What is the show for you. Through my love and lots of blunders, my goal is to help you along your faith journey. Our paths may be different, but all of our roads need to lead home so that we can be with our Father. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Stand, Kneel, Now What? I'm your host, Karen Estep, and today's episode is really inspired by the fact that my eldest child just received their first Holy Communion, and I wanted to let everyone know that we didn't think as a family we would get there because we made a lot of mass mistakes. Especially in regarding to our children and getting them to pay attention during Mass. So that will all be covered here in just a minute. Right now, we are on our last week of doing the Acciones Nostras. So here we go. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Inspire our actions, Lord, and accompany them with your help, so that every word and action may always begin and end in you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So as I said, my eldest just received their first Holy Communion. And it was one of those things that about a year ago, we didn't know as a family if we would be celebrating this. Only because we were in this desperation mode of trying to get our eldest to really pay attention during Mass because they just weren't. And we made a lot of mistakes as parents, and we made a lot of mistakes in not trying to get them to pay attention sooner. And when we realized that how important it was for our eldest to start paying attention during Mass so that when it was time for their first Holy Communion, they would really be able to understand how special taking the Eucharist is. We realized that we had made some pretty big mistakes with them. And so we started trying to correct them. And we may have not gone about it the correct way. But we kept telling them they needed to pay attention during Mass so that they could understand how important taking the Eucharist is, and that it's not something that we take for granted, and that we really need to pay attention to how we are worshiping during our time at Mass. And this was met with a lot of stubbornness, and our eldest finally, at a breaking point, looked at my husband and I and said, I don't really care. And I'm not taking my first Holy Communion, which of course I think hit my husband and I a little bit harder because we are converts. This isn't our first Christian denomination. And I grew up in a denomination that didn't take communion. And it kind of broke my heart because I thought I was doing the right thing. We did all sorts of things. We tried to talk about how important the Eucharist was. We told them that all of their friends in their Catholic school were going to get First Holy Communion. So we were hoping to peer pressure them a little bit. We tried to make Mass really cool. We did all these things, and they just kind of looked at us and said, I don't care. And so finally we decided to pray. My husband and I decided to do a lot of prayer and just kind of leave it up to my eldest. And what's funny now is my eldest child, who did not want to take communion about a year ago, has it on their heart to join the religious vocation. And it just goes to show you that even though you can make a lot of mass mistakes that I'm going to talk about here in just a minute, it all turns out the way God wants it to anyway. And God's timing is so perfect and amazing. So, not only are we going to talk about some of the mistakes that my husband and I made, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to maybe combat these mistakes, because these are really easy mistakes, not only for people that have come home later in life to the Catholic Church, but also maybe to people that are reverting to the Catholic faith and don't really remember what they did as a kid in the pew. So they need some tips and tricks to do with their children. Or maybe you're a cradle Catholic and you don't know what to do with your kids. I will say, when my husband and I joined, our children were they were right at 4 and 6. So they were like 6.5 and 4.5. So I don't know exactly what to do for little babies. I know what's out there for little babies. Choose Life has these like silicone rosaries that you can give your babies during Mass that are baby safe and they're baby friendly. I didn't need one of those, obviously, but there are some tips and tricks to do with babies as well. There are several women out there that talk about that. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is Danielle Bean. I believe she has 8 children, so she has lived through it all, all stages of life, and she has grandchildren now, and I'm sure she is passing along all these tips and tricks too. Also, I think the Catholic Momcast has also shared some tips and tricks for babies during Mass as well. So those are out there if you have younger children than 4.5 and 6.5. Let me back up just a little bit though. When my husband and I first started attending Mass, we did what most Protestants would do. We looked for the Sunday school classroom for our children to go to while we went into the worship service. So if you are a cradle Catholic listening to this and you've never been to a Protestant church, especially the Protestant church that we had gone to when our children were babies, you had a room that the children went to, and the children got to do crafts and they got a snack and they sang songs and they did a Bible activity. And it was wonderful because you knew that they were safe and loved and being cared for, and they were learning about the Bible. They just were doing it in a classroom instead of up in the worship space. And we could then listen to everything going on in the sermon and participate in the music without having to also chase children around. So when we first started attending Mass, we looked for that. I'm going to tell you right now, if you are discerning becoming Catholic, they don't have that. Your children attend Mass with you, which is beautiful in the fact that our homes are what we call domestic churches. So really, children should be learning about their faith and about God at home first, and then Mass is something that you attend as a family, which I really love. There are just some times that I would love not to also have to grab a million snacks and coloring books and toys. I would like to take it all in as well. So that was our first mistake. The second mistake that we made going into Mass. Now, we had not decided if we were becoming Catholic or not at this point. So we were just, when we would go into Mass, I would like to say we weren't in the worship aspect of Mass yet. We were in the observational aspect of Mass. So I've heard this several times. Mass is a participation. You participate in the Mass. You're not a cheerleader. You're not on the sidelines. However, when you are discerning and going through the process of wondering if it's God's will for you to join the Catholic Church, you're in the observation. You're on the sidelines. You're a cheerleader. And we wanted, as my husband and I wanted to take as much of that in as we could, so that when we went to the RCIA director, it's now OCIA, but when we went to the director, we would have a really good decision made, that this wasn't something that we were doing speedily, that this wasn't something that we were just rushing headfirst into without understanding how mass works, the dynamics, and all of that kind of thing. So the second mistake we did is we put our children on the phones. Our children don't get a ton of screen time. They do get screen time, and that's not what this episode is about. However, at the time, we just weren't handing them phones all that often. And I will say, we still do not. We are not a family that hands phones to children during grocery shopping, going out to eat. That's just not our MO. And if that is your MO, that's fine. That's just not what we do. But my husband and I really wanted to observe without having to almost entertain our children. So we let our phones do it, which was a really bad mistake, because then taking those slowly away was really hard and almost hindered their process in observing the Mass as well. So, in the whole process of that, we also only sat in the back of the church, because we knew if we needed to make a quick exit because our children were being too rowdy or needed to use the restroom, we needed to be in the back, which I will say, I don't know if it helped or hindered. It's kind of up in the air. Once we became more comfortable, we started going up farther and farther towards the front of the church as well. But we didn't want, and this is a total pride thing, we didn't want anybody staring at us because we didn't know what to do. So we sat all the way in the back, put our kids on phones. And just looking back on that now, I'm like, oh my gosh, why did we do that? Because I know that my husband and I wanted to observe, but it's really important for our children to be observant of what's going on as well. So we came back together. We decided we were no longer going to put the children on the phones. And then I have a really big sensitivity to the brand of Play-Doh. So I had bought some of this homemade Play-Doh kits that came with the Play-Doh in little bitty tubs. And then it also came with like jewels that you could stick in the Play-Doh. They're really cool. I don't know if the company is around anymore. However, we would bring cafeteria trays in a big bag. We look like we're moving into Mass at this point. Like, we have a huge bag of toys and coloring books and snacks, and I'm carrying, diaper bags, and just not diaper bags, but you know what I mean? Like wipes in case they need to wipe their nose, all that kind of stuff is coming into Mass with us. We look like we're moving in. We're carrying cafeteria trays. I'm sure people questioned things then too, because I know my husband and I did. Anyway, so we would get these little tubs of homemade Play-Doh out and let the kids play as long as they were on the trays and they weren't making a lot of noise, which actually worked really well. So would I do it during Mass anymore? No. But if you need something to take on a really long car ride, that would be a suggestion. So it just looked like we were moving in all the time, and it just became this like, oh my gosh, they're still not getting anything out of Mass and we're just playing with Play-Doh. So that was our third mistake, if we're counting mistakes. Oh, goodness gracious. So like I said, in this whole process, we've decided to move up closer and closer to the front so that at least they could see what the priest was doing. And I do think that there were some Sundays that helped more than others. But I think because my husband and I were being way more observant because we were up closer, we could also answer questions. We could also just have the kids watch us watching the priest, if that makes sense. And I think that really helped them as well. So now what we do, and it's by no means perfect. We have some really good Sundays, and then we have some Sundays that we have a lot more energy. And I know that we are not the only Catholic family that really wants to worship God, that also has very noisy children that you try to keep quiet. But our very sweet deacon once said in the middle of mass, after this kid had been screaming a little bit, not my not my kid, but another child who was much younger than my children were, was just crying and screaming. And the deacon just stood up there and said, "Look, bring your children to mass. They belong here. If the church isn't crying, it's dying." And he meant that is like, if there aren't families coming into the church, then the church isn't thriving. It's not surviving. And so bring the children to mass, bring them in, let them observe. Don't put them on phones like we did. Let them really see and let them participate in the worship. Even if you are just discerning this for your family and you are just trying to decide if you are ready to come home to the Catholic faith, bring your children in, let them be a part of it. Explain things if you can. And if you can't, look it up together as a family. We did that often. We have a really cool book that I will tag in the show notes that's like the Holy Mass, and it's done from, it's a really cool concept. It's Legos, but they explain the entirety of the Mass using these Lego figurines. And the number of times that our children have gone over and said, "Okay, mommy, daddy, what does this mean?" And they pick up the book and we go through it as a family, has been just great. And it's been a learning process for my husband and I as well. So this is a call. If you are reverting, converting, a cradle Catholic, bring your child to mass. I know it can be hard, but I've seen it in several places lately on social media. We aren't going to mass. We aren't going into that church to get something from mass. We are going to worship God, and children deserve to worship God as well. So there's a couple of things I've seen on social media just to kind of, dust off our superhero parent capes and know that we're doing the right thing by taking our children to mass. So let me get into what we do as a family now. We do still take coloring books with crayons. We are very careful with the crayons. My husband grew up in a family, which I really appreciate, and I also did as well, but it was kind of more drilled into my husband that when you leave a place, you should leave the place better than when you got there. So before we even leave our pew, we make sure we've got wrappers, we've got boogie wipes, we've picked up the crayons, we've picked up crayon paper. And I know I say it crayons. I'm from the Midwest, guys. It's a typical Midwest thing. Crayon is what I'm talking about, Crayolas. Anyway, so we make sure that we pick all of that up before we leave the pew and then genuflect on our way out. So coloring books, crayons, and we got these really cool shining light doll books that have stickers, and the kids can take off the stickers and then create the story of the saint. Both of my children love them equally. They don't always make it out of our Sunday bag, but like I said, the children love them. And those are just for Sunday. And we have coloring books that are just for Sunday that they cannot get out the rest of the week. So I know there are several other small Catholic businesses that make mass bags entirely for young families. Several of them have rosaries, coloring books, coloring pages, just different activities to keep your kids engaged in what's going on. I know that CatholicMom.com produces coloring pages and work pages that are like crosswords or word searches for Sunday Mass. I don't think they do it for every day Mass. I have recently become a contributing author for Living Faith Kids, which I will also tag in the show notes. They have a magazine that you get if you subscribe, and it comes out quarterly. And they have little readings that go along for every day of the year. And I'm an author for it, which I think is really cool. They sent a couple of examples of what their magazine pages look like. They're very kid-friendly, bright pages, great stories. Your child probably needs to be able to read. They're marketed for kids around like 6 to 12. And so they're really good stories that also tie into the scriptures that go along with the daily mass readings. So go ahead and give those resources a look at sometime this week. And then also, if you have other resources, please always send those to me. I love supporting small Catholic businesses. It's kind of a thing I do around here. And I just love that we like to keep our families engaged at Mass, because when we're worshiping as parents, then our children see that and they want to also do that. And they want to be a part of it. And yes, we made a lot of mistakes. However, our eldest took their first communion. We've come a long way in a year with them. And I'm so proud. I'm such a proud mama that they really took this next step in their faith journey on their own. And now they get to participate in Mass a bit more. So there you go. All right, let me just add in a note too, because I think I have a lot of new listeners. I do not refer to my children by their genders. I also will not refer to them by their names. They are they and them. I believe wholeheartedly in what the church teaches about gender ideology. I 100% think women are women and men are men, and theology of the body is a beautiful message that Pope John Paul II put out. However, to protect my children, I don't put them online and I won't tell you what gender they are. So I just didn't want anybody to get confused about the use of the pronouns they, them. My husband and I do 100% believe in what the church teaches about gender ideology. Okay, let's get into some odd one out. So last week we did soda, pop, and Coke were your three choices. Now, I love hearing what people call what is in the Midwest pop, only because once again, I had Southern grandparents and everything in my house, even though I grew up in the Midwest, was Coke. And it didn't matter if it was Dr. Pepper, Sprite, Mr. Pibb, anything. I would have friends come over and I would say, hey, you want a Coke? And they'd say, yeah. And I'd say, okay, what kind? And they were like, oh, I thought you just meant Coke. And I was like, no, we have different kinds of Coke. We have Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb, blah, blah, blah. And it would really confuse people. Now I mostly say pop, but one of my favorite great aunts used to call it sody pop, which I just love too. I wish I could adopt that. It's just my great aunt Molly called it sody pop, and I love it. So actually, soda came in last place at 11%. Pop came in second place at 22%. And Coke came in third place at 67%. So most people thought Coke was the odd one out. I did have a friend on Facebook put that Coke was the odd one out. No, she said that pop was the odd one out because she grew up calling everything Coke, kind of like I did. So thank you for participating in the Odd One Out. For those of you that don't know or are new here, Odd One Out is just a silly game that we play. I always start with a prayer that is uniquely Catholic, and then I always end with the Odd One Out game because it's silly and it brings us together as a community. I just love it, and I give my opinion the next week. This week, though, we're going to have Battle of the Patterns, Odd One Out version. So your patterns you can choose from are polka dots, plaid, or cheetah. So those are your three choices: polka dots, plaid, or cheetah. Which one do you think is the odd one out? I have a feeling I know which one will be this week, but I have had that feeling a couple of weeks in a row and have been completely wrong. So I'm interested to see which one you think is the odd one out this week. As always, if this podcast has blessed you in any way, shape, or form, please like, share, subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm. If you could also leave a review either in Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. I would really, truly appreciate it. I would just love to see our Stand Kneel Now What community continue to grow, continue to reach people. There were so many people that are coming home into the Catholic faith. So many famous people are coming into the Catholic faith right now too. And it's our time. It's our time to shine and welcome these people home. And if I can just help just a little bit with giving people tips and tricks and making silly mistakes that I've learned from coming into this faith, I would love to. All right, everyone, I will see you next week.